It's just been craziness.
I hate when we have Mondays off. I love Fridays off, but I hate Mondays off because
Why?
Monday, it seems like such a catch-up day. It's such a get yourself ready for the rest of the week versus Friday. It's almost like we're done.
Yeah.
So it's just mentally, I don't know why it shouldn't, but Mondays, when I don't have a Monday, I play catch up the rest of the week.
Well, I don't know. I don't have the same holidays off as people.
Correct.
So, like I still worked on Monday.
Yep.
So, but then, we could take off different times and during the day. So
Good and bad for both of our jobs.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
still a lot of fun.
For sure. Okay, so today I want to talk about appraisals.
Okay.
When you're in escrow.
Let's do it.
So when you're not buying a house cash and you're getting a loan, you have to do an appraisal.
Yes.
And so recently I've run into a couple issues where the house didn't appraise. So what do you do when you're a buyer and what do you do when you're a seller? And it's really an interesting conundrum because, it's an interesting market. Before we had to release appraisal contingencies even to get into escrow.
That's right.
And on some houses, in some areas, I have to write an appraisal gap in my offer saying if it doesn't appraise, we'll still pay an additional so much money.
Yes.
In some offers, I've heard the agents saying that they've gotten an entire appraisal gap contingency.
Yeah, which was
written.
common for a long time too, when rates were super, super low. And I keep telling this, we say it every week, as rates go down, the market's gonna get even more competitive. If rates were 4% today, we would be back in that market on every single property. We're not there right now.
No, but in some areas we are.
In some areas we are. Every single
so.
property, we're not there. So
Yeah.
let's talk about appraisal gaps.
Yeah.
Step one, you have to talk to your lender about consequences of low appraisals and have a strategy for it for every single offer you make. So I'm gonna ask you a question. Do you have a good idea on a property when you make an offer, what the worst case value would be on an appraisal?
Usually, yeah.
Cool.
Almost every time I know. And usually I go in thinking it's either gonna appraise, it's not gonna appraise, so that I'm not surprised. Very rarely am I surprised on the appraisal.
Because I found the emotions behind a low appraisal versus the reality, like what the consequence would be to cash to close or payment, it's a lot less severe than people think.
For sure.
So
for sure.
Let's go through a couple examples. Let's say you're putting 20% down on $1 million home.
And before you go on to that,
Mm-hmm.
let's discuss that. If you're an FHA or VA buyer, this does not apply to you because you can't come in with the extra money on an appraisal anyway, right?
You can.
Do you have the money normally?
No,
to be
I
able
mean,
to do
having
it?
and being able to are
Yeah,
two different things.
right.
But FHA is actually becoming more of a hot program, even for really well-qualified people because of all the recent changes and how much lower the rate is, especially for higher loans. But
Okay. Oh,
in
okay.
general.
Okay.
In general.
Okay. All right.
You take the loan to value percentage. So if I put 20% down on $1 million property, my loan to value is 80%.
Okay.
That means you're going to be responsible for coming up in cash with 80% of the difference of the sales price versus the appraised value. So if your appraisal comes in $100,000 low, you would have to bring in $80,000 more. Not the full 100, but it's based on your loan to value. That's the gap you have to bridge.
Okay.
So that is if you don't want anything to change with your loan terms, your down payment, your rate, your loan to value.
So the lender will come up with that 20% of it.
The lender, well, the client will the end of the 20, yes.
Okay.
Because loan to value is based on the lesser of the appraised value of the sales
that's
price.
good to know. Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, especially if you're putting 20% down, what you also want to look at is what it would take to not spend another dime cash, but to have your payment go up as a way of solving that gap. So the simple way to think about it is if your property comes in 5% low,
Okay.
right? Take your down payment. Your down payment effectively went from 20% to 15% without doing anything.
Explain that in dollars.
So you have $1 million property. You're putting 20% down. You have an $800,000 loan.
Okay.
It comes in at $900,000, $100,000 short.
Okay.
Okay. Option one, like we talked about, bring in $80,000 extra to make sure that loan to value ratio is still 80.
Okay.
The other option is to already have a plan of what less than 20% would do. What I mean by that is your option one is to pay more cash. Your option two is to just reduce your down payment percentage without changing anything, right? Because that same money you were putting down is not getting you 20% anymore.
Right.
And dealing with a 15% down loan.
Okay.
Because that's the other way. You have two options when appraisal comes in low. It's either you bring in more cash or you restructure the mortgage and you have a higher payment without bringing in more cash.
But that also brings in mortgage interest.
It brings in mortgage insurance, and there are
Interest.
ways of combating it. And
Right.
people have these stigmas of mortgage
They do.
insurance and stuff. And if you take away the stigma and you just look at the numbers, it's not that big of a difference.
Okay.
It really isn't. So this is why each and every time you have an offer, if you think an appraisal is coming in low, talk about this up front, model it out. It takes me 5 minutes at the most. So you know when you make that offer, what the worst case situation would be.
Okay.
So you're already prepared for it. So we're going to be more and more into that market. But-
I've seen it a little bit more and more lately, which is why I wanted to talk about it. And I've seen deals fall apart, but I've also seen if the listing agent and the buyer's agent work together towards the same goal, usually you can work something out.
Yeah. And other options clients have, your lender cannot order a second appraisal. It
No.
can't, but a different lender can. Sometimes there are bad appraisals out there and they're verifiably bad, but no one's going to do anything about it. We've had plenty of rescue deals where someone called me and said, "Oh crap, Jesse, I'm 5 days in escrow. We just got the appraisal back. It's low." And I said, "Cool, let me order a new one. We'll get it back in 7 days. And if mine comes in at value, you're good to go." So it's not the best option, but if you want to avoid more cash or a higher payment, that potentially is an option as well.
So do you take on that cost of the appraisal if someone asks you that?
It depends on the relationship. Like if you ask me, of course. If it's a random person that called me and 5 other lenders, no way.
Okay.
Just not going to do it. If it's a past client, absolutely. I don't care about having that incurred cost, even if it's not going to close with me, to be of service to my referral partners and
That's
clients.
not- yeah,
But
that's
if an internet lead calls, no, you're paying me the money for that appraisal.
Okay. So you just know that there are ways to deal with it.
There are multiple ways. The only way you get stuck where you have no option is like Lori said, if you're putting minimum down payments, 3 or 5% down on conventional or 3.5% on FHA, when those come in low, you have to basically come in with that difference. So when an appraisal comes in low, if you have
Or if the seller is willing to work with you, which very often
we haven't talked about that
Yeah.
option yet. And this is important because this is where she's really good, but she's also very knowledgeable about the market to know how much we can push.
Yeah.
So if an appraisal comes in low, you are not forced into anything unless you've already removed some of these rights. And if you have it in place, you can go back to the seller and say, "Hey, we're $10,000 short. I'd like you to reduce the sales price by $10,000. Or let's compromise, reduce the sales price by 5. I'll bring in 5 to cover
That's
the
usually what it
difference,
is.
and
It
we can
comes
meet
to
somewhere in the middle."
somewhere in
So
the middle, yeah.
knowing options, I always found, no matter what it is, it helps you make an informed decision and not an emotional one.
Yeah.
So, have the
You need
conversation.
to take the emotions out of house buying because that is
Which is impossible, let's be honest. There's always emotions, but you also need to have some sort of analytical reference so that the emotional side of the brain can reconcile with the rational side of the brain, right? It's just, there's like, even when I bought my house, and I've done this for so many years, like I was still terrified. So, I mean, I
it's
can only
scary.
imagine.
Buying a house is scary.
And very emotional, but you have to be able to go back to what we know. What do we care about most? We want to get into real estate. We want our payment to be, something we can afford, and we want our cash out of pocket to be something we can afford. If we can get back to those 3 things, even if we veer off track a little bit in a transaction, we're going to get home.
Yeah, 100%. So that's our takeaway of the day.
So talk about it. She's very good at doing it. She'll do
And
this
so is
naturally
he.
on anything, but have the conversation before so you know if you're going in with an appraisal contingency removal or a gap, you know exactly what that would be if we model the worst case. We'll hope for the best, we'll plan for the worst.